followers. This is Alison, and I'm here on our Instagram Live, and we are doing one of our little newish kind of series for now that we're calling Alo Home Mora. While we're at home, while you're at home, we are here to bring you cool stuff to do and to think about and to talk about. So kind of keeping our community together, even though we are all kind of separate. Hopefully we're all in our houses. If you are not in your house and you are one of those essential workers, first of all, thank you so much for keeping everything together. Medical workers, people working in grocery stores, places like that, thank you so much. If you are out and you are not one of those essential workers, go home, okay? Go home and stay there, please. All right. So today I'm here to kind of talk to you a little bit about something cool that I was reading that's related. And as you probably know, if you listen to the show, I am a teacher. And so schools have been shut down for the most part. We're still doing online learning, but it's much different than my normal day. So I found myself with a lot of extra time to read and things lately, which has been awesome. And I've also not been able to work my second little weekend job at the Current Theater in San Francisco, which is currently playing Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. So to get my fill of Cursed Child, this is what I've recently read. If you don't know what this is the wonderful Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, The Journey book. It is a fantastic, fantastic book. It's a really cool behind the scenes look at how the show was made, and from basically the first concept ideas all the way through opening on Broadway and a little bit beyond. So I've been getting my fill of Cursed Child through this, and so I just want to kind of share some of the cool stuff I found in this for you and show you some of the really awesome stuff. So we have... hitting myself in the face with the book. First of all, it's an absolutely gorgeous book. Really sturdy, beautiful, beautiful. You may not be able to tell, but the little nest logo here is actually raised, which is just like amazing. It's gorgeous. And then we dive into the actual book itself, which has a beautiful foreword by J.K. Rowling talking about the show. And then we start right away with some beautiful pictures of my faves. The original West End cast, I am very attached to, as you probably know if you've listened to me on the podcast at all. And there's a lot of pictures from their show in here. So it starts out with talking about Sonia Friedman and Colin Callender, the producers of the show, talking about how they kind of came up with the idea. They arranged a meeting in autumn 2013 to kind of talk about this idea they had of, okay, how might we bring Harry Potter to stage? And they were a little nervous. They talked about being a little nervous about it because obviously everybody had approached Joe wanting all sorts of different things, trying to bring Harry on stage. And they say that the first thing they really knew is they wanted it to be a new story. They wanted it to be something new, not just bringing the 7 novels on stage. And very much an intimate character drama is the words they use, which I think they succeeded at. It very much is a very intimate, character-driven play. One of the things that was really cool is they kind of talk about Sonia Friedman and her relationship with her father, and how that influenced kind of where they wanted to go with the story, and kind of where they started working with things. First person they brought on was John Tiffany, who very much was excited to be a part of this, but also kind of nervous, as everyone they said was. There's a lot riding on something like that. And they realized that they were like, okay, we want John Tiffany. John Tiffany kind of brought on Jack Thorne. He had worked with him before. But let's dive into some of the more exciting things. Our next section is about developing the story, which obviously has a lot of conflict, kind of. And first of all, I just want to say, I've been right. I've been right this whole time, and this book confirms it. They talked a lot about how they went to Jo and they were asking, okay, what do we think we want to do? They kind of had this idea of they wanted to bring Albus in. She was like, yes, I want to talk about Albus. They talk about Jack Thorne and John Tiffany and Jo working together. And one of the things that I just have to throw out there is they have a letter. They have a like email exchanges between Jack Thorne and Jo where Jack Thorne originally had the headmistress of Hogwarts being a different professor, one we've never heard of before, named Marazion. I believe that's how you'd say it. Marazion. Marazion, yeah. And Jo wrote him back after seeing this and went, sure, but let's make it McGonagall. McGonagall's going to be the mistress at that time. That she's the better fit for this. So everybody who was trying to tell me that Jo wasn't involved in this, I now have proof Jo was very involved in this. I win. That was a little bit of satisfaction for myself. So they talk a lot about kind of how the story was developed, and really that beyond anything else, it's a story about fathers and sons, and it's a story about children and their parents, and it's a story of legacy, and it's a story of finding your own place in a world that wants to try and tell you who you are. We get some lovely snapshots of the writers' notebooks and kind of ideas that they were playing with. I love things like this. Being a writer myself, I love seeing kind of everybody, like other writers and their process. So that was really awesome. Then we move into the workshops and rehearsal section. So now that they've kind of got a script going, that's the next stage of putting a play together, is workshopping. So people come in to kind of read the script, interpret the script, and they start working with, okay, what do we need to change? What's working? What's not? One thing I really loved about this, they started in February 2015 with workshops, which seems like a really long time ago. But apparently Paul Thornley, who was the original Ron, was part of the workshops pretty much from the beginning. And they talk a lot in this section about having to kind of hide what they were doing, all through the workshopping and the rehearsal process, where they were just kind of in rehearsal spaces, basically big warehouses, and they couldn't really tell anybody what was going on. They even couldn't have like janitorial come in to clean the rooms during the rehearsal process because they didn't want anything to be spoiled or anything to get leaked out. So the team starts coming together. Not only actors start coming in, but designers, costumes, props, sets, movement, lighting, all the people that bring together a show. And there are a lot of people that bring theater together. And so they talk to a lot of people. They talk about, they talk about how they were going to deal with magic. The quote is, "From the start, the producers knew they didn't want to compete with the computer-generated effects of the 8 Harry Potter films. We knew we wanted to get back to what it felt like to read Jo's books for the first time. Therefore, we knew it needed to be raw, rough theater," says Friedman, "simple through and through," which I think they did a beautiful job with. If you've seen the show, the magic seems very, it's very physical, but it's also very kind of natural and kind of organic in a lot of ways, it's beautiful looking at things. So they start working through script readings. They talk about scripts. We get some cool photos of like designing sets, designing props, designing kind of the stage setup, which is a big deal. How is the stage gonna work? They talk a lot about how they designed the cloaks and how kind of the different fabrics that they use in that. They talk about costuming. By the way, there's going to be spoilers in this, so sorry. But this is a really cool picture. They actually give a lot of room to the specific fabric that they use for the Dementors costumes. And how it's just this scrap of fabric that the costume designer had in her bag at the time and was like, this would be perfect. And it's this beautiful kind of gossamer, flowy kind of fabric that looks beautiful. So they go through the workshops, kind of getting things set, and finally they were like, all right, we've got things set. We're ready to start casting. So they talk about casting. They talk about, obviously, Paul Thornley had been there since the beginning. They talk about Noma Dumoenzi and why they decided to bring her on, because John Tiffany says, I knew that I didn't want all three characters to be white in the stage version. Noma Dumoenzi, Dumezweni, I say her name wrong all the time and I feel bad every time, just seemed to have that majesty, Hermione's intelligence and strength, and I would definitely agree with that. She very much captured Hermione, I think, and Hermione's spirit in her portrayal. And so they start going through workshops and rehearsals with the main cast. This is a really fun picture down here, if you can see it. That's Anthony Boyle and Jamie Parker practicing the the polyjuice scene. But it's really funny because, I mean, I feel like a lot of the behind-the-scenes pictures we've gotten, we haven't seen Anthony with his natural dark hair. We usually see him in the Scorpius wig, which is that bright blonde. They talk about kind of getting wands designed, and the guy that they had design the wands and carve the wands that were hand-carved, they said, yeah, we probably got through about 3,000 wand carvings before he went, wait, these look like wands. What are you working on? Everything very much kept closely under wraps during this stage. Apparently, we find out that every company has a house cup tournament. So everyone is sorted into their respective houses, the actors' houses, not what characters they play, their houses. And they get points for things, and they win. Paul Thornley, who was a Ravenclaw, says that the contest was heavily skewed. There were a lot of high-ranking Gryffindors that always seemed to win every week. I'm not going to name names, but Ravenclaws did very badly. That's all I know. So lots of fun stuff behind the scenes. Sam Clement is a Hufflepuff, we find out. John Tiffany is a Gryffindor. And obviously Paul Thornley's a Ravenclaw. So they have this cute picture of kind of their first behind the scenes cup tournament, how they were taking care of points. So they go through rehearsals, everything's very secret, everyone's very excited. A lot of the actors talk about, and people in the production talk about, how they couldn't even tell their kids what they were doing, and they couldn't tell anybody anything that was going on. So there's a lot of secrecy. Chapter 3 focuses on movement, music, and magic, which I think are some of the best parts of the play. And they're the parts of the play that you really don't get to see if you're just reading the script. So unless you see the show, you're missing these kind of key elements of this. So they talk about the design decision to include suitcases all the time. If you've seen the show, you know suitcases are kind of a big thing. They're on stage all the time. They're used to create different things like the Hogwarts Express, the graveyard. Suitcases are a big deal. And they kind of talk about, there's a specific reason for that. It's to kind of show the idea of traveling between spaces, between magic and normal, between who we are and who we're going to be. It's very beautiful, very lovely setting that up. They talk about a lot of the physicality of the show. Warm-ups are a big deal. I will tell you that I have stumbled into warm-ups at the Curran multiple times accidentally. So that's always fun when you like turn a corner and you're like, oh, the cast is warming up. I'll be back later. They talk about the dances, which are some of my favorite parts. They've got a nice big picture of probably my favorite dance, which is the wand dance. I just think it's absolutely beautiful. It's so fun. It's so full of energy, and it's so full of just magic. Like, this is what it would feel like to be at Hogwarts, is to do that. They also talk about the staircases a lot, which we like the staircases. They're a good time. Moving on, they next talk about music and how they approached Imogen Heap, who is the composer of the score, and how a lot of it comes from her catalog, but it was very much a design decision with a lot of different people involved. The sound director and the movement director and Imogen Heap and all the directors and kind of people in charge were a big part of, okay, what do we want to sound like here? Here's this bit of this song. Here's kind of this thread of this song. Let's weave this through here. So sometimes it says she had 30 different individual tracks for a single song, which is a lot. Kind of putting things off together. And then we get the interesting bit about magic and how the magic happens. And this is so cool, guys. It's so cool. They talk about how they kind of made the illusions, what they decided would be an illusion, how light and sound and movement also work into illusions to kind of make you believe that what they want you to think is happening. There's a lot of misdirection based on movement and music to make magic, which is really cool. We also get a really sweet picture. This is the year 2 New York cast practicing a little bit of magic during the show, which is really fun. Going back to a few different things, they talk about the duel, they talk about the time turner. Should I show you this photo? It's a big spoiler if you haven't seen the show. So here's a big spoiler if you haven't seen the show. So ready? Woo! This is one of my favorite moments. It's one of my favorite moments as an usher too, because I love just hearing everyone's reactions when it happens. It's so cool. It's so cool. Then we get to designing Hogwarts, which I thought was one of the most fascinating things. So they talk about how their Hogwarts was actually based on the kind of set is based on a train station, and specifically it's based on King's Cross, obviously. But it's King's Cross from the past. So the set designer, Christine Jones, found this amazing station of the booking office at St. Pancras in 1912. If you can see it right there. And it's a beautiful photo. And St. Pancras, as you may know, is right next to King's Cross. In fact, it's often mistaken for King's Cross because in the movies, they kind of focused on St. Pancras instead of the actual King's Cross because it's a prettier building. And so they talk about how Christine Jones found this photo and found a few other reference photos of train stations and kind of building designs that they really liked. And that's what the stage setup is really made to look like. It's made to look like this train station to kind of represent walking into this world and going on this journey and everything train stations represent. They talk about how train stations feel a little frozen in time, like time doesn't really exist there because you have people saying goodbye and then people saying hello and people leaving and people coming and people going. And so getting this kind of design, but that can also be used for different locations. Obviously, it has to also kind of look like Hogwarts. It has to look like Godric's Hollow a little bit at one point. It has to look like the church in Godric's Hollow. So there's a lot of different places, and they really did a beautiful, beautiful job. They talk about how the turntable on the stage, if you don't know what a turntable is basically a big circle in the middle of the stage, usually kind of set within a stage, that turns. And it gives a lot of movement. It allows for kind of scene changes and things like that. And they talk about their turntable was specifically based on train turntables, like old train turntables where a train would come in and that's how they turn it around, is through that turntable. So using those components, that's how they designed the stage. This was really cool, especially if you're into like design of any kind. This is Christine Jones, her notebook. And she talks about her process where she has these stage setup designs and everything is color coded. And so she knows exactly what's going on in each scene, what's set for each scene, who's coming on and off, and it's all designed in this little shorthand, which is really, really cool to get to kind of see how she processed, how the stage was going to look. And they also talk about kind of costuming and prop design and how there's that interplay between all of the different design departments of who is going to be the best person to talk about this thing. Should it Should this be something we do with just lighting? Should this be something we do with the sound? Is this something that needs to go more into costumes? And the interplay between all of those different departments, which comes up with some really cool stuff. There's pictures of models of the stage from the top, which is awesome. They talk about building Moaning Myrtle's sink and how they did that, because they're like, we can't have a toilet on stage. Like, that's not gonna happen. So lots and lots of cool stuff about that. They talk about designing the house banners and how they wanted them to look different. They kind of played around with designs, and finally they settled on the beautiful house banners that have the house mascots in them as well as the Hogwarts logo, which, if you've been to any of the theaters, you've seen the wallpaper, you've seen the floor, and so they've got a lot of these kind of stars and moons around it, but they also have symbols for each house around the H. So there's a feather for Ravenclaw, there's a drop for Slytherin. They said it's either blood or venom, depending on how you want to interpret it. There's a leaf for Hufflepuff, and there's a sword for Gryffindor. So they've kind of incorporated different design things in there. One thing I really loved that I've actually looked at a lot on the stage, and that I didn't know that this was there, but on the front edge of every stage is a quote in brass, "Inlustret lumine," which means "let the light shine." And the words face the actors, and Christine Jones told the actors that that message is for them. It faces them, they see it all the time. And it's just a beautiful sentiment that a reminder to the actors when they're on stage of, you're letting the light and the beauty of this world shine through you on this stage. So that was a fun tidbit I did not know about. We talk about props. Most of the props actually aren't handmade, which actually quite surprised me. A lot of them are found and then kind of put together. We get some information on what the... Oh, sorry. My foot is falling asleep and I need to adjust how I'm sitting. What the gillyweed is that's used by Albus and Scorpius for the second task. It is actually apple skin. So it's green apple skin. They had lots of different options. Sliced up apples, seaweed, samphire, licorice laces, all sorts of different things. And they gave them to Sam Clement and Anthony Boyle and said, what do you want to use? And they went with the apple skin. So that is really cool that that's what they're actually eating on stage when they're shoving gillyweed in their mouths. It's just some little apples, which I would probably take over everything else as well. I don't know, maybe they could have used like gummy worms or something. That would have been pretty cool too. I would have taken that. They made different candies and things, different new designs. They also talk about the owlery, which is there for one scene, and I just have to tell you all, this has been my phone background. This photo has been my phone background for so long because I found it and I loved it. And it's a beautiful picture. So they talk about the owlery and how all of those owls are designed on real owls that they found pictures of, and that they've kind of like put together with a lot of love, and how they're kind of sad that they only show up in one scene and they're so far away, because they're beautiful and they're fun. So when you go see the show, take a look at those owls. They're really awesome. Now this part is super cool. They talk about wands, and wand design is something that has always fascinated me. So they've got lots of different designed wands, but we also get kind of these drawings of the main 7 wands. So of course we know that Harry's wand is holly. They stayed true to the books on what woods that the characters' wands were made out of. So Harry's is holly, but they designed his to look like veins a little bit on the handle. It says Harry's wand evokes the roots of a tree, symbolizing his deep connection to his family, and arteries that speak to his place at the heart of these stories and to his renowned golden heart. Which I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. Ginny's wand is a U wand, this one right here, and they've kind of designated it as cozy, that hers is meant to kind of evoke the thoughts of a sweater, those classic Weasley sweaters, and a soft embrace but a fierce core. Very, very Ginny. Ron's is a striped sweater, chestnut, and its smile, warm and fuzzy and comforting is how they described it. Sorry, my phone's dying. Hermione's, of course, is vine. And Christine Jones says, I imagine Hermione's wand is a living organ full of power and possibility, which we're about that. Power and possibility. Albus has a cherry wand, which I love, I think is beautiful. And they talk about that he's a worrier, Christine Jones said. So his wand has these kind of nubs on it, like you would see on a tree branch about to bloom. And she talked about how she pictured him kind of using it kind of like a worry stone, where he rubs his fingers across this to kind of comfort. And I can attest, because I have his wand, that yeah, like that's a thing to happen. One that was like, whoa, to me was Scorpius's wand. So this is Scorpius's wand right here. It's willow, and it has these markings on it, these number markings on it. And Christine Jones, this is a quote from the book, says, I thought about how tortured Scorpius is. As an extension of the self, the wand bears the marks of his souls, counting the days till he could go to Hogwarts, or perhaps even self-harming for relief from his pain. And I remember reading that for the first time being like, ooh, I would have never thought that about Scorpius. I probably go to the days until he goes to Hogwarts is what I would count it as. But it's a fascinating look at the character, I think, to kind of include that detail in there and to think about that. Our last one we have is Draco's, which they describe as a saber, and Draco's is a hawthorn wand. And Draco's wand is the most elegant of the wands we created. It embodies his aspiration to be a better parent than his father was. It has pride in its shape and integrity in its core, which I thought was beautiful. So we get a lot about the wands. I love wands. They're so cool. A lot about kind of costumes, wigs, makeup. Originally, Draco was actually supposed to have hair that looked more like Lucius, but the director stopped them and said, no. Looks too much like his dad, and he's trying not to be his dad. So that's why Draco's got that kind of ponytail in the back instead, except for in one scene where he kind of is more like his father. They talk about costume fittings and how they put things together. They focus on each individual character, these main characters. So for example, there's the wonderful Jamie Parker as Harry Potter in his costume. And apparently Harry's suit looks the same, but he's actually got several different suits, depending on what kind of the function is of a certain scene. So they've got suits and they've got costumes that have wand pockets and wand holsters, different things. Katrina Lindsay, the character or the costume designer, talks about how Harry's tie is always a little off-center, kind of a man of action, trying to look the part of a ministry man, but is always ready for action. We get some really cool sketches of original costume sketches and what they were thinking of, which was awesome to look at. There's also a note in here that not only does Harry have his lightning bolt scar, but he also specifically has the scar that says, I must not tell lies, on the back of his hand. And you can't really see it on stage, but Jamie Parker really insisted on that scar being there, because he said, you have to have the details. They have to be there. You're not going to believe it. And even if the audience can't see it, the actors and everyone on stage has to believe it and has to see it. It has to be real. So, yeah, they've got I Must Not Tell Lies is still on the back of Harry's hand, which I just adore. They talk about Hermione's costume and how Hermione's hair changes throughout the show based on what she's doing. So here's a quote from Noma that says, as a woman, but I think also as a black woman, our hair has an important story to tell, says Dumazweni. It's a silhouette that we want to achieve. So they specifically change her hair depending on kind of what timeline they're in. So it's a little bit more wild in the timeline, in the dark timeline. It's a little bit more kind of rigid in the timeline where she's the DADA professor. They talk about it kind of sitting more like a crown when she's Minister for Magic, which is absolutely fascinating. Next we get Paul Thornley as Ron Weasley, and his very comfy kind of sweater look. A funny quote that I found out was Katrina Lindsay was like, yeah, it goes with the Weasley thing, but Hermione probably shops for Ron's clothes, which, like, yeah, Hermione shops for Ron's clothes, but kind of keeps to kind of what he's used to. They also talk about how his shoes, they order his shoes from the same place new, they get shipped right to their to the dyers, and they completely beat up his shoes. So Ron's shoes look kind of comfy, worn in, beat up, really fun. And they talked about how Ginny and Harry's costume colors are these coordinating blues. Harry's got kind of more to the teal, darker blue, and Ginny's got kind of a lighter, almost green blue. And her costume stays consistent pretty much the whole time because she is supposed to be consistent, always Ginny the whole time. She is always herself. So we've got some sketches of her. They talk about Albus and Scorpius and his costume, and how Albus's costume reflects Harry, both as a kid and Harry as an adult in a lot of ways, with coloring. At the end of the show, he's got this hoodie on that's a blue, that kind of matches Harry's blue. And they talk about also his pants fit and how he starts the show in kind of really baggy trousers, and he's 11, and they talk about, well, we think he probably wears his older brother James's hand-me-downs. And then as they go through the show, we get a little bit more of a fitted look. And he's growing, he's changing, he's becoming more mature, and the costume very subtly reflects that. So we get some changes there. They also talk about the really cool blazer cloaks, which I want one so bad, guys. I want one of those beautiful blazer cloaks so bad. They're gorgeous. Going through Scorpius, they talk about how Scorpius is always very put together because he's a Malfoy. He's very put together, he's very refined looking, he's got the skinny jeans because he's fashion. And they also talk about the fabric that Scorpius's costumes had to be made out of. In part 2, spoiler time, in part 2, Scorpius goes into the water, and he's wearing the dark timeline costume, and he has to get wet. So it's actually 2 different costumes. He's got one that's dry, and one that's made out of wool, and one that's made of a special material that looks like wool but can get wet. So he can do that scene. He also has 2 wigs. He's got a wet wig and a dry wig, because it's very hard to get that very white blonde hair as a wig, I guess. They call it epilé hair. Unprocessed and obtained by taking naturally gray hair and pulling out only the white hairs to use. So that's really cool, and really kind of crazy. So it's unprocessed so that he can go in the chlorinated water. And the most expensive wigs on stage are Scorpius's beautiful white blonde hair. This is the costume that he goes underwater with. That is obviously the dry version, not the wet version. So we go through a lot about costumes behind the scenes. Draco and how he looks like Lucius and how he doesn't. Cloaks. There's a whole section on cloaks, guys, because cloaks are so cool. And it turns out there's actually the cloak. They all have a basic cloak. But they also have like additions to their cloaks. That's the hood they can put up for when actors are taking things on and off stage. There is a specific sound design for cloak swishing. And over 1,700 feet of wool was used for the cloaks. It's a lot of wool. It's a lot. So they talk about also kind of the difference between timelines and time in kind of how Hogwarts looks and how Hogwarts students look. So what goes on top, what goes underneath, how we can tell that we're at a different time than another one from how it looks. We get some beautiful stuff on some other characters. Flipping through. Okay, this picture is wild. Are you ready for a wild picture? That's a Dementor. Yeah, that's the Dementor costumes. Underneath that kind of chiffon, silky outer cloak, they are 3D printed masks that fit perfectly on the actor's head. Because, yeah, guys, it's actors underneath there. Those aren't puppets. They're real people. And then they have, like, this skeletal, like, cage, basically, in these hands. And this is terrifying. Like, this is gonna haunt my dreams. Forever. And then they, of course, have the outer layer that kind of swoops around and makes them look like those very spectral kinds of things. We get into sound. There are 2,000 individual sound cues. 2,000. That's a lot. And each of them is individually designed. The lighting designer and the sound designer, Gareth Fry is the sound designer, he was like, we had to design a lot of things ourselves because you don't just have a catalog of magic or time turner. So they had to go design these sounds for all these different things. Flipping through, they talk about lighting a lot. Lighting is so important in shows, guys. Lighting can make or break. It really tells you what to focus on. One of my favorite parts from lighting was they talk about the time turning into Godric's Hollow. And there's a part that's also in present day, where they're in Godric's Hollow in present day. And they talk about how the doors in present day are lit by the color they are. So the red door has a red light on it, the blue door has a blue light on it, to kind of make those colors more vibrant and alive. And then that lighting goes away when we go into the past. So everything is a little bit more muted to signal to you as a viewer, hey, we're in the past now. So even these tiny little things that you may not notice when you're watching the show are sending you all these signals of the story, you know, these tiny little things. He talks about, Neil Austin talks about how he was running back and forth across the auditorium while they were doing lighting design because he wanted to check that every area was perfectly lit on the stage from all aspects of the house where people are sitting. And so making sure that everybody can see what they're supposed to see and not see what they're not supposed to see, and that it looks great from every angle. It's absolutely phenomenal how much work goes into that kind of thing. And then they talk about, all right, we've got everything designed, we've done rehearsals, it's time to move into the first home, which was the Palace Theater. And the Palace Theater was specifically picked, basically, as the theater because it looks a little like Hogwarts, and it's also an individual building. It's not connected to other buildings. It's very much kind of standing alone, kind of on the corner of the street. And it's a kind of historical building, so they had to be very careful with what they did. But they also decided to add a few little magical touches. It already looks a little bit like Hogwarts, they said, but they did things like those dragon light sconces that are absolutely beautiful. On the front of the marquee, they've got the matching kind of stars and moons that matches what's on the stage setting. And they talk about how they were very careful about how they presented the front of the building and inside the building, because it's the first step into the story, and everything the audience sees even before the show helps build the world and helps us kind of take that step into Hogwarts and say, yeah, like, we're back in this world, we love this world, and we're gonna go on this journey together in this world. So there it is, the lovely palace. Gorgeous. It's a gorgeous theater. It's very, very beautiful. and how they also talked about previews and opening the show, and how there was a whole bunch of press outside when they did their family and friends and kind of closest like dress rehearsals and very first kind of previews that they did, and how they were just so impressed that no one told the press anything, even coming out of previews, where the keep the secrets buttons came from. They were just so proud of how people were able to keep the story and keep what happened to themselves, so that everybody could go in clean. Obviously, that's changed a little bit in the past few years. They also talk about the infamous owl story. If you haven't heard the owl story, the very first night of previews at the Palace Theater, there are 2 times during the show where owls show up to deliver letters. And the very first time, Harry, Ron, and Hermione and Ginny are eating dinner, and they get a letter from Professor McGonagall that says that Albus and Scorpius have disappeared off the train. Well, originally it was a live owl. They had live owls used for this, and they had them trained to kind of fly on stage and then fly off to certain points. Well, the problem was, the first time the owl came out, it got confused about where its mark was, and it went to the wrong spot and kind of got lost in the house, and they had to stop the show for a little bit to get the owl out of where it was. And so, where's the quote? I'm looking for the quote. John Tiffany made the easy decision for going forward. No live owls in this show anymore. Thank you. So unfortunately we could have gotten something really cool, but I mean, I guess it's good that we didn't get some of that craziness. They talk about opening day and the red carpet and just how everyone was feeling great. I mean, and how much effort had gone into it. And then, of course, we got to awards season. What's on Stage Awards, Critics Circle Theater Awards, Evening Standard Theater Awards, 9 Olivier Awards, which is the most for a play ever, and Oliviers are a big deal. And Tonys, I mean, awards coming out there. Well, not Tonys yet. Tonys were after Broadway. But just awards coming out their ears. And it wasn't until after opening day that that Colin Callender and Sony Friedman started talking about Broadway. They knew eventually they wanted to get there, but they said they were a little superstitious and they were waiting until after opening day before actually talking about going to Broadway. So they decided to go to Broadway in 2018, and they did a major renovation of the Lyric Theater. It had basically been gutted, the Lyric Theater. It was a disaster, and they basically reassembled it, kind of built it back to its former glory, and made it this very welcome, beautiful space. There's the Lyric if you haven't seen it. It's got that huge wing on the side, which is like, you can see it forever. It's really cool. And they said it was nice to be able to do that because they could, that they were rebuilding, because they could include the lighting in the rebuilding. So you can't see any of the lighting rigs in the Lyric because they've all been hidden in the framework of the building, which makes it seem even more seamless and magical when the show is going. So that was really sweet. Of course, if you haven't seen the Lyric, guys, oh my gosh, it's the most beautiful building. Like, gorgeous. Gorgeous, gorgeous. That's the lobby. Absolutely stunning. And they talked about, again, that audience experience and bringing people in. So we opened in previews on Broadway. The show opened in previews on March 16th, and then officially opened April 22nd, 2018. The Big Seven of the actors came over from Broadway, and they talked about just how New York audiences and British audiences are so different. And I've talked about this before too, like they're totally different. There's applause and clapping and gasps, and Americans are just louder in general. But the actors said they loved it. They kind of fed off that energy that people were giving to the show. And the very last bit of the book, this beautiful book, is how they want to reach the biggest audience possible. So it talks about how the journey's continuing. Opening in Melbourne, opening in San Francisco, opening in Toronto, opening in Hamburg, just announced opening in Japan, all over the world, how they're going to bring this fantastic, beautiful, marvelous show with all these different wonderful casts. They've got these beautiful photos of different casts from all over, well, from New York and Melbourne and London, year 2. Phone's dying again. It's just a really great book. I really recommend it, especially if you're stuck inside. Getting a little behind the scenes look at this beautiful play. If you haven't been able to see it yet, or if you have been able to see it, getting a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, a peek behind the magic. I really recommend it. Definitely order it. Find some time to read it. It took me just a couple days because it's so fascinating. Definitely recommend. Thanks for joining today on this little live video. We're going to have some more stuff coming out, some here on our Instagram, other places. Some of it's just for our Patreon, so if you're not a patron yet, go ahead and sign up for that. We really want to be here for our community during this time that we are alone. So that's what our little Allo Home Mora project is all about. So make sure you join us. We'd love to see you. Until then, open the Dumbledore in your mind, but close your Dumbledore of your house. See you real soon.